Welcome to the Lakewood City Council meeting for Monday, April 18, 2020. I guess I'll restart that. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to the Lakewood City Council meeting for Monday, April 18, 2022. Madam Clerk, if you will call the roll.
Councilmember Anderson.
Here.
Councilmember Bell.
Here.
Councilmember Boki.
Here.
Councilmember Brandstetter.
Here.
Councilmember Farmer.
Here.
Deputy Mayor Moss.
Here.
And Mayor Whalen.
Present.
You have a quorum.
Thank you very much. And now if you'd please stand and join me in the Pledge of Allegiance to our nation's flag, followed by a moment of silence for our men and women serving overseas. I pledge allegiance to the flag, United States of America, and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Well, tonight we're honored to start our evening with proclamations and presentations. And first, we have our proclamation declaring this coming Saturday, April 23, 2022 as Parks Appreciation Day. And if the chair of the Parks and Recreation Advisory Board, Jason Gerwin, would join Councilmember Don Anderson at the podium to receive the proclamation.
Well, thank you. It's been my pleasure to rejoin the Parks Board as the council liaison after I had done that for many years in the past. And one of my personal mantras is that local government's really a three-course meal. It is public safety, infrastructure, and parks for dessert, and everybody likes dessert. Whereas parks, playgrounds, nature trails, open spaces, community and cultural centers, and historic sites make a community attractive and desirable place to live, work, and play. And whereas parks are a place where people can reflect, re-energize, or socialize, a place where everyone is welcome regardless of age, race, beliefs, or social and economic status, and a place where a sense of community is created. And whereas parks and open spaces have always provided a welcome respite from our fast-paced, high-tech lifestyles, contributed to our ongoing economic vitality, and protect and preserve our natural environment. And whereas use of Lakewood's parks significantly increased during the last few years when our city, our nation, and the world were affected by the coronavirus pandemic, our community realized how important the parks were to daily life as they flocked there to escape isolation, to boost their mental health, and to enjoy fresh air and open spaces, and found a safe and healthy place where they could stay and play close to home. And whereas after a 2-year hiatus from this important community event, we anticipate hundreds of volunteers representing businesses, community groups, churches, and organizations will come out to prepare the parks for the spring and summer season. And whereas park supporters of all ages will volunteer their time to clean up and beautify American Lake Park, Port Steilacoom Park, Kiwanis Park, Springbrook Park, Wards Lake Park, and the Lakewood Community Garden, and other beautification projects throughout Lakewood on Saturday, April 23rd from 9 a.m. to 12 p.m. Now, therefore, the City of Lakewood Council has hereby proclaim April 23rd, 2022 as Parks Appreciation Day in the City of Lakewood, and urges all residents to show support by visiting, beautifying, and protecting our parks. Proclaim this 18th day of April 2022, Jason Whalen, Mayor. Now, the chair of our Parks Board, Jason Gerwin.
Thank you, Mayor Whalen and City Council. It's nice to be back. First meeting since COVID for me in person, and it's going to feel real good to come out on Saturday the 23rd. I invite you all come to put on your work boots and join us in working it. But what is a great community event, and we get a lot of community support. It takes a lot of hard work from our staff, the leadership from Mary Dodsworth, particularly the maintenance department who get all those tasks and projects ready and have to finish them up if we don't complete them. Their work is invaluable. And, we have learned in the past 2 years with COVID that parks are an essential service, and we need them. And so I'd like to also take this moment to encourage City Council that we need to invest more in our parks and our parks maintenance, because they don't stay that beautiful by accident. And so with that said, I'd like to thank you for your past support and continued support. We are very appreciative on the Parks and Recreation Advisory Board. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Gerwin, and to all members of the Parks and Rec Advisory Board. You guys do fantastic work and always provide very helpful recommendations to the council. So. I guess we'll take a picture because our communications manager is suggesting that we do so. So, okay, we'll come on up and do it. Thank you all. Kick me in the seat once in a while. No, it's good. That's right. Next, we have our state legislative session update. And for this, we have our governmental affairs consultant and lobbyist, Shelley Helder with the firm Gordon Thomas Honeywell Governmental Affairs. Welcome.
Thank you, Mayor. Thank you, City Council. Good to be with you this evening. I am Shelley Helder, and normally I would be joined by Brianna Murray. She had a conflict this evening, so hopefully I will be able to do as good as Brianna would do if she were here as well. So this evening, the purpose of my presentation is to give an overview of what happened during the state legislative session and provide a report on the outcome of the city's legislative priorities. I'll give a brief update on some additional legislative issues, and then we'll talk about next steps. So the 2022 legislative session was the second year of the state's 2-year cycle. It's a short 60-day session, and the focus was adopting the supplemental operating, capital, and transportation budgets. The session was a hybrid format. Some legislators were there in person, some participated exclusively virtually. Towards the end of session, there was more, there was the opportunity for in-person access for the public. Democrats still held the majority in both the House and the Senate. And probably the most significant outcome of the session is the passage of the transportation revenue package, what's referred to as Move Ahead Washington, which I will get to more in just a moment. Another significant event, or I guess significant outcome, is that the legislature adopted the redistricting maps. They made some slight changes from the maps that were recommended by the Redistricting Commission. Those maps are now final. There are some lawsuits that are still pending, and so the result of those lawsuits will determine what happens to the maps down the road, but as of now, the finalized maps are current law. In the 2022 session, any bill that was introduced in 2021 that did not pass into law could be considered again, as well as any new bill that legislators introduced. There were 1,049 bills introduced in the 2022 session. So that's in addition to all the bills from 2021. In total, 303 bills were signed into law, just a slightly smaller amount than we would expect to see in a supplemental year. This is a quick overview of the 3 supplemental budgets. I'll just really quickly highlight some important comments here. The state's operating budget, the budget that funds all state agency operations. In February, the state received a really favorable revenue forecast showing that there was going to be an additional almost $1.5 billion beyond what was previously anticipated. Additionally, the state had a little over $1 billion in federal COVID-19 relief funding to allocate. The final budget, which takes into account the supplemental appropriations, so the final biennial budget is a $63 billion budget. $2 billion is shifted to the transportation package, which I'll again talk to in a moment. Some noteworthy investments in the operating budget are funding for local governments for Growth Management Act planning, a new body camera grant program for jurisdictions looking to establish that type of program, pretty significant investments in rental assistance, landlord mitigation, and assistance with utility arrearages as a result of the pandemic. The capital budget is the state budget that funds all bricks and mortar construction projects that are not have any connection to transportation for public projects and nonprofit. The supplemental budget is $1.5 billion. It's funded primarily through existing bonding capacity, some funding from the Federal Infrastructure Act, as well as federal ARPA dollars, and a smaller transfer from the operating budget. There's $62 million that's allocated towards the local and community project bucket. That's the bucket of funds that the city typically competes for when we have a capital budget request. And I wanted to note the size of that program this year, because in a supplemental year, we would expect it to be smaller. For comparison purposes, in the first year of the biennium, it was $250 million. And when you recall that there are 49 legislative districts in Washington, in the first year of the biennium, that's roughly $5 million per district spread out around the state. In the second year, that's less than $1.25 million per district. That's not exactly how it breaks down, but it's helpful to see. And it really emphasizes the importance of ensuring that our capital budget requests are made in the first year of the biennium so we can be the most successful. Moving over to the transportation budget, this was the budget that has had the most pressure placed on it over the last few years, not only because of declining revenues, but also because of increased demands. The Move Ahead Washington package is a $17 billion package, and it's allocated over 16 years. The primary sources are, again, a one-time transfer from the state operating budget. Funds from the Climate Commitment Act, which is a policy that the legislature adopted in 2021 and will take effect starting January 1, 2023. So as part of the package, the legislature made a plan for how to spend those revenues. Additional revenues for the package come from the federal infrastructure package, some increased transportation-related fees, and then ongoing transfers from both the state operating budget and the Public Works Assistance account. And that's ongoing for 16 years, the length of the package. Roughly a third of the package is dedicated to projects that are intended to reduce reduce carbon emissions. And that's because they're funded from Climate Commitment Act dollars. That's a stipulation on any Climate Commitment Act revenue has to go towards projects that reduce carbon emissions. The remaining 2/3 of the package is dedicated towards primarily state maintenance and preservation, some new highway projects, the state obligation for fish barrier removal, and backfilling some gaps from Connecting Washington. So to review the city's legislative agenda, as a reminder, the city adopts legislative priorities that align with the state's 2-year cycle. So in the first year of the biennium, the city identified priorities, and when that session ended, we amended the city's priorities to eliminate the items that were accomplished. So on the screen here is a list of the priorities from 2021. The items that were achieved were removed, and you as a council identified what your priorities were heading into the supplemental year. The main item that was not accomplished in the first year was the multimodal transportation study. And so that's what remained for the second year. And on the screen now is the list of the items that we worked on in this supplemental session. I'll just touch on the multimodal transportation study first. This is an item that the city has prioritized for several years, and it's a $250,000 request to partner with the state to identify what types of multimodal solutions there are to connect DuPont to Lakewood, taking advantage of planned and existing investments, particularly grade separated crossings. The final budget does include $250,000 for a multimodal transportation study. It's not the exact study that the city requested, and I think the only difference is that the geographic area that the study will be covering is broader than the region that we identified. So it will study the region from central Thurston up into Pierce County. And that study is going to be led by the Thurston Regional Planning Council, and city staff has already reached out to the executive director and will be engaged in that moving forward. Jumping back up to the first item on the list, the main gate interchange. This is a priority that, again, was added to the city's legislative agenda just this last year, really in anticipation that it may take several years for the legislature to pass a revenue package. And many of us were surprised that it was passed in an election year. And so what we were able to accomplish in this supplemental year was raising awareness for the need for investment at the main gate interchange, and making sure that it's on the list of projects moving forward. So even though it was not included in the Move Ahead Washington package, it's now out there as a project on the radar for the state to be aware of. The third item on the screen is a policy request. We were asking the state to shift their policies for how they determine discharges of individuals, particularly individuals with a history of violent offense, when making their discharge plans from state facilities. And in identifying this legislative priority, we highlighted a few areas that we thought the state should take action on. And one of them was changing the law to require discharge plans to essentially institute a fair share policy, similar policy that's been implemented for correctional facilities, most recently for discharges from Special Commitment Center, and asking that that policy apply to state hospitals. We worked with Representative Bernowski to introduce that legislation, House Bill 2045. The bill was scheduled for a public hearing. Councilmember Farmer was lined up, ready to testify, even though she was on vacation. And at the last minute, the bill was pulled from the hearing schedule and was not given another hearing. So the bill did not advance. We shifted strategies and began focusing on a request for funding in the operating budget to have a study completed that will highlight where the necessary facilities are for individuals when they're discharged. Right now, we've heard that that information is not easily accessible. And so the final operating budget includes $250,000 for the Department of Commerce to work in coordination with other relevant state agencies and develop a report that shows the geographic location around the state of the types of facilities that will be necessary both to house and for treatment of individuals released from state hospitals. The deadline for that report is December of this year. It's a relatively quick turnaround time when you consider state reports. And so I do anticipate that that will take some encouragement from the city in order to make sure that that deadline is met. And it was intentional that that deadline was selected because the hope is that this is an important first step in ongoing effort to ensure that the state has a shift in their policies over discharge from an inequitable distribution of releases into Pierce County and particularly City of Lakewood to having it be more equitable maybe to county of origin, ideally to county of origin, but at least more equitably around the state. The final priority on the screen was, again, a policy request asking the state to shift the way that they do placements, particularly into adult family homes, to protect residents of adult family homes from individuals that are being placed there that have history of, again, violent offense. This was a difficult priority to advance due to lack of legislative support. I think it's an item that there is a lot of, I guess, sympathy over the concern, but maybe not agreement on the proposed solution. So it's definitely something that if we, or if you as a city council choose to retain it as a priority, we'll need to brainstorm perhaps a better strategy to advance it. A few other legislative issues that I just want to call your attention to. First is House Bill 1329 regarding the Open Public Meetings Act. This is a bill that just provides additional flexibility for local governments to hold virtual meetings in the event of a locally declared public emergency. Right now, virtual meetings can only be held if there's a state declared emergency. This legislation allows local governments to make that call depending on their own local circumstances. There were 3 bills that passed that were trying to clarify some of the concern and ambiguity from bills that passed in the 2021 session. One of them clarifying that all less than lethal alternatives are available to law enforcement officers. Another clarifying that physical force, reasonable physical force is available in community caretaking functions. And then third, defining what physical force is. Notably, bill that would have clarified the threshold for vehicular pursuits did not pass. There were several bills introduced that would have limited or eliminated local control over middle housing, so duplexes, triplexes, ADUs. None of those bills ended up passing the legislature. However, there is $7.5 million that's allocated for local grants for jurisdictions that are interested in developing ordinances to increase the availability of zoning for middle housing. And then finally, I thought it would be good to note the Ssmcp priorities and their outcomes. I-5 Mounts Road to Tumwater and the Nisqually River Delta received $75 million in the Move Ahead package. The Defense Community Compatibility Account, that is an account that is created in order to provide state funding towards incompatible development, such as the North Clear Zone. The program has not been funded. We advanced legislation this year to try to make some technical changes to make the program more competitive. Although the legislation did not pass, it made it all the way through the process and died at the last step. There were 2 really good outcomes as a result of that. First, every legislator is more aware of what the DCCA is now than before that bill advanced. And second, part of getting it to the very end required advocacy from all the military communities around the state. And so that kind of coalition that was developed as a result will be very helpful next year when there's a larger budget request. Finally, the occupational licensing improvements, there were 2 bills that passed related to that. The state will now be part of 2 interstate licensing compacts, one for occupational therapists and the other for psychologists. So next steps. We often say that lobbying is a year-round effort. So just because the legislative session is over does not mean that our work ends. In fact, there's a lot of work to do this interim. I think first thing and really important thing is to thank our city's legislators. You all know that public service takes a lot of time and commitment, and particularly the legislative session is very demanding. Of note for the city this year, Representative Steve Kirby, after serving 21 years in the legislature, is deciding not to run for re-election. And so it will be important, I think, to recognize his service to the state and to the city. Of course, we will participate in the multimodal transportation study and engage in the report that's going to be developed on the geographic equity of state facilities. We'll update the city's legislative agenda with you all, as well as the priority or the policy manual, and then begin legislative outreach on those priorities. There are, in addition to Representative Kirby, many retirements from the legislature. I think we're getting close to nearly 24 retirements, and it is an election year. So the entire House and half of the Senate is up for a re-election, subject to the new districts. I thought it may be helpful for folks to see what the new districts look like for the city. So this is the 28th district. The pink or purplish looking area is the portion of the district that is new. And the hashed out area is what used to be in the 28th and now is no longer. And this is the 29th district. In closing, I'll just mention that in your council packet is a much longer report that goes over every bill broken down into subject area that passed the legislature that corresponds to a statement in the city's policy manual. So if you're looking for more information about something, feel free to check out that report, or you can always reach out to me.
Well, thank you. Other than questions about the very odd drawing of the legislative district maps around Meadow Park Golf Course for whatever reason. Are there any other questions for Ms. Helder? Mr. Anderson?
Thank you. Thanks for all your great work, Sherry. I know it's quite a task to keep on top of all these things. I'd like to ask you about some of the goings on with respect to the work to correct the 2021 police legislation. And I don't use the word clarification or ambiguity because the wording of the 21 statutes are really pretty clear. And I think that clarification and ambiguity are spin terms. We now have a situation where the police can see a stolen vehicle, and vehicle thefts are up 100 to 200%, depending on where you are and what time you measure. We also have, fortunately, knock on wood, not so much in Lakewood, but surrounding us, a great increase in violent crime. Same police can have actually effect a stop and see a known felon with a gun on the seat and can't take him into custody, can't chase him if he drives away. Did any of our legislators, I think all of whom voted against the correction to the pursuit statute, give a rationale for their vote?
That's an excellent question, and I would have to go back and follow up. I don't know the answer off the top of my head.
Thank you.
Mr. Brandstatter?
Well, again, thank you for this presentation. And as in past years, I think the city has been well served by you and your colleagues' advocacy for what we would like to see the legislature do to go forward. On the many years we've been trying to deal with the adult family homes and the discharge of folks. Are we still in the situation of where trying to get it through the legislature, is our problem still that it's a very localized problem and that the problems manifest themselves in Lakewood and Pierce County, but the things that we see here aren't perceived as existing throughout much of the rest of the state?
Yes,
Okay.
that's very much still the challenge.
So how is there a strategy that has suggested itself in that regard, particularly given that we have a lot of districts which will have new legislators in the next thing? Is there some way to get ahead of the re-education curve on that? I think that as you look at your between sessions efforts of looking to that, or if there is something that we as a group of elected officials can do to reach out not just to our local legislators, but particularly to new legislators around the state, and speaking about both the need and our frustration that it has taken a long time for the rest of the state to see the tea leaves on this. If you would, as you take a look at what it is we might do and suggest we can empower ourselves to try to do that, I think to go ahead. Let me just ask about the budgets, and particularly the transportation budget, which is looking ahead 16 years and things to do that. Was there much calculation about the dollars versus what is happening with inflation, or is this already a new transportation program that won't add up?
That is a great question. And something I didn't mention because it's a little into the weeds, but the money that's allocated towards projects in the Move Ahead Washington package, projects are allocated funding over a 16-year period, but it's not phased. So for example, the Ssmcp priority of Mounts Road to Tumwater in the Nisqually River Delta, it receives $75 million. But at what point over the next 16 years, we don't know. So to your point, Councilmember Brandstetter, I think there are many projects that received funding that where we sit right now in 2022 anticipated that to be sufficient to accomplish their goal. But if their project isn't able to begin for another 5-8 years, I imagine that there will probably be cost increases come that time.
Mm-hmm. Okay. And in your report on that, you mentioned that a portion of that funding was to fill gaps from the Connecting Washington plan from a number of years ago. Was that a general pot of money, or were there specific gaps that were listed?
Another good question. There was specific projects, kind of mega projects within the Connecting Washington package that were coming in significantly over what they were projected to cost. And so there's several projects that were allocated additional funding in this package in order to make those projects be able to be completed.
Did that include any Pierce County projects?
It did not include the project through JBLM I-5 corridor. It did include the Puget Sound the Puget Sound Gateway. So that's in North Pierce County. It's a mega project connecting the ports.
Okay, well, again, thank you. And I hope we'll get a chance to get updated by you as your work between legislative sessions takes place, so that we can be fully prepared for the next campaign. Thank you.
My last question is on the geographic equity issue. Given the millions, hundreds of millions that the state plans to invest in Western State Hospital, one wonders how effective the geographic equity argument will play when it comes to funding additional state facilities around the state. What's the strategy going to be over the next biennium?
Well, I think geographic equity, I think there is a really solid policy argument for that, because the state, while they are making significant investments in Western, they're also transitioning to more community-based facilities. And they're going to need to be making decisions about where do those facilities go. And so I think this report will be really informative and helpful in our advocacy to show that there's arguably adequate facilities in Pierce County. There should be investments in other locations throughout the state. I think what's really noteworthy is that we simplify it by saying behavioral health facilities or this general pot of facilities, but depending on the individual's need, there is a variety of state facilities that are needed. And so it's a matter of the state identifying what the population is that needs to be served. And not every region has the ability to provide every service that's needed. So it may not be that there is a service in every county, but at least it's not everyone is being discharged into Lakewood or Pierce County.
Right. Well, thank you. We appreciate your work. Look forward to chatting earlier in the season this time so we can, again, work collaboratively on the next legislative agenda.
My pleasure. Thank you.
Yeah, good to see you. Thanks. Next, we turn to the public comment section of tonight's agenda. Public comments are accepted by mail, email, or by live, virtual, or in-person comment. Comments may be sent in advance by mail or email to Ms. Schumacher, the city clerk, at her email address bschumacher@cityoflakewood.us. Comments received up to an hour before the meeting have been provided to the council electronically. I recall receiving a few this afternoon, but if the clerk would read the names of those who have submitted comments in advance to remind council of the information we've received.
Mayor, we received comments in advance from Helen Wagner and Christina Minetti.
Thank you. I recognize those two as well. Members of the audience may comment on items relating to any matter related to city business under this public comment period. Comments are limited to 3 minutes per person. We ask that you direct your comments to the council as a whole and not to any council individually. Virtual public comments will be received tonight as well, and we will start this evening with the comments in writing before we move to those who may be appearing via Zoom this evening. Is that correct, Ms. Clerk?
Mayor, would you like me to read the comments that we received in writing?
No. I just want to make sure that we usually flip those who have priority, those present versus those virtual. And then the next week we go virtual and then those present on the
Correct.
list.
So we will be going to the virtual comments first this evening.
Okay, very good. So those who are attending via Zoom will continue to have the opportunity to provide your live virtual public comments by entering the meeting ID number or dialing the phone number that you may see on the screen. And it appears we have a variety of folks who wish to address the council during the public comment period virtually. Mr. Haugen appears to be first on the list. Mr. Haugen.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah, Dennis Haugen here from Sioux Falls, South Dakota. Used to live in Lakewood. You pretty much lost your future in 2018 and 2020 when you made it a sanctuary state. And then again in 2020 when you told the whole world that you could not adequately protect your legal citizenry, particularly in Seattle. And you'll never live down the reputation of your summer of love. But there's also a mathematical problem here. When you invited everybody along with the president and the governor, and you invite the whole world to come into the United States illegally. But there's now a governor, a Texas governor, who is going to start, or has started busing already certain categories of illegal aliens, illegal immigrants into Washington, D.C. And I think he's already got about 8 busloads going, and he drops them off right in front of Congress or whatever, government or whatever. And there are other states are also talking about that. It looks like the states that are non-sanctuary or legal will probably find ways to make illegal immigrants less welcome and start sending them in your direction. That's going to blow everything you lay down in your budget. You know, it's going to get blown away because the world is full of people that want to get here, billions. And you can't do budgets with infinite numbers you don't even know the extent of. So A lot of that is probably the education system is going down, all levels from K1 all the way up to PhDs. We see examples of this. We have the people who don't see property rights for Gary Oaks. And then you got what's happened to the Black Lives Matter. Well, the gal turned it into a 501c and always said she's living in a mansion. And now they're trying to audit the books and they can't seem to figure out where all that money went. In other words, the Black Lives Matter movement was used as a slogan to take money from Blacks. So plus you got all this other mess coming in your direction. The perception that, you know, you're just not stable. And that's going to take you a long time to get rid of that reputation. Thank you much.
Thank you. I just remind public commenters that it's helpful if the comments are related to city business. So next is Mr. Tishomer Dunlop.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes.
Hello, my name is Tishomer Dunlop. I am 17 years old and a resident of Lakewood. I am also a member of the Ad Hoc Tree Committee. I wanted to comment tonight about the impact that the proposed 2.5 million square foot warehouse project in Tacoma would have. It would be the 6th largest project of such a warehouse complex in the world. I want to comment on one of its many impacts on Lakewood, and especially on a particularly vulnerable part of Lakewood, Flat Creek, and the wetland associated with it. So just because it's in Tacoma, that doesn't mean it's not going to have any impacts on Lakewood. The warehouses would be located on an area that potentially provides recharge for the springs that feed Flat Creek. I've heard that the Department of Ecology is planning on putting a test well on the site to determine whether recharge is happening. The site will also create a lot of stormwater due to impervious surfaces, which would overwhelm a lot of the current infrastructure that feeds Flat Creek. When I was in elementary school, they put a picture I drew on the cover of the stormwater calendar that the city sponsored. It seems like with all the warehouses here in Lakewood, no one really cares about the stormwater problems anymore. This project right next to Lakewood is too big to ignore, and I'm asking the City Council to file its official complaint about this project. The deadline is April 21st. Thank you.
Next, Mr. Bunchy Carter.
Y'all can hear me?
Yes.
Oh, very good, very good. Okay. Well, my name is Bunchy Carter. Pretty sure y'all know that already. Minister of Defense of the Black Panther Party of Washington. Pardon me, I'm a little under the weather. I found it very interesting. I always found it very interesting hearing from that first gentleman that spoke. And I appreciate you for calling out the fact that none of what he said had anything to do with the city's business. One thing I do want to point out about the city's business is the point that was made, or question was, you know, a point was brought up about changes made to the law that prevent the police from doing X, Y, Z. And you know, as a citizen who does not respect the crime element any more than you do, I understand what you're saying. If I know that somebody's a felon and they're dangerous with a gun and they have a gun sitting on their seat, I would want somebody to stop that person. Now, I don't want them to die, but I do want somebody to stop that person. You know what? You know, that's what you're supposed to do. That's supposed to be the job of the people that are hired to serve and protect the community. Now, unfortunately, in too many cases like that, it could be somebody who's not a felon and doesn't even actually have a gun and they end up dead. That's a problem. But the bigger problem is that we're worried about the police being able to or not being able to do something without addressing the simple reason why they even should be existing in the first place. The only reason why the police even exist, we're not going to go back to slave catchers. We won't talk about that right But the only reason why they exist in current society is because there's a major split between those who have and those who do not. So the real question is, shouldn't we be addressing poverty? If you eradicate poverty, to a large degree, you eradicate crime. Any person with common sense knows that. But I guess after listening to our young brother talking about the ad hoc committee and what's getting passed, I already heard about the huge warehouse project in Tacoma and about the effects that it's going to have on Lakewood. So while we're worried about the bottom line and bringing in more money for the city, what about finding a way to address the fact that so many people in the city lack that resource? Because, see, the reality is poverty and crime have a direct correlation. If you look at where most crime takes place, if you look at where most crime originates from and what most crimes aren't crimes against other people. They're considered crimes against property. Most of the laws on the books are to protect property, not to protect people. So you got to ask yourself, how backwards do we have this thing? Really? I only got 22 seconds left, but I hope that y'all take that into consideration when you start worrying about what the police can and cannot do. All power to the people, justice for Sayi Joaquin. Y'all have a good night.
Thank you. I see additional folks wishing to, or at least attending virtually, but without hands raised. Is there any other? It appears Carol Colleran has her hand raised. Ms. Colleran.
Yes, just a minute, please. I'm looking through my prepared. Here we go. Thank you, council members, for allowing the public to speak. As a resident of Lakewood for 18 and a half years and previously a resident of Tacoma and University Place, I'm happy to live in Lakewood. It is really beautiful with the winding streets where non-residents get lost. The roadie show that is just now starting and the compassionate and great people who live here. Over the years, I have noticed a few homeless people on the streets. Thankfully, some of them have been able to find daytime shelter at the library, a few places for meals, and apparently some hidden places to spend the nights. But lately, it seems the homeless population has mushroomed. I cannot drive anywhere in the town core between South Tacoma Way and Gravelly Lake Drive without seeing people walking the streets with a blanket over their shoulders anytime throughout the day. Thankfully, Lakewood has participated in the purchase of Aspen Court. And I've read on the city website that Lakewood also purchases bed nights at Nativity House in downtown Tacoma and at the Tacoma Rescue Mission. And I know Lakewood supports LASA and has various efforts to help keep people housed. Studies show that a majority of the homeless people in Lakewood had stable housing in Lakewood before they became homeless. And every night there are just under 300 homeless people in Lakewood. I know you're not ignoring this situation. What I'm wondering is where these homeless people can find shelter in Lakewood and a day center other than the library, which is not really set up to be a day shelter for the homeless. A day shelter would be wonderful for their day-to-day existence, but absolutely life-saving in the hot weather that we will soon have in the summer and the freezing cold weather next winter. Perhaps you can put me in touch with other people who are interested in helping those who need shelter. Thanks very much.
Thank you. Next, with their hand raised, is Amelia Escobedo.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes.
Hello, my name is Amelia Escobedo, and first I want to say thank you for having the CDBG funds to help the community. Another thing that I want to talk about is the buildings that are being built in Tacoma. We don't need any of those buildings. And if you guys could say a word for Tacoma, because that is going to affect us. And right now our administration is asking for the economics and the environmental part to ramp up and kick in. but I don't see it ramping up and kicking in here. Also, JNZ signed an executive order 22-02, achieving equity in Washington state government. So I want to make sure that you guys knew about that. That happened in January. And I want to hear like how you're going to implement that into the Lakewood City Council, into the police, into the fire, all these different governments. We need to see equity in those areas. Another thing is, I don't like to talk about this a lot, but I have urinary incontinence, and I need you guys to fight for people like me that have to go to the bathroom, and we need a card or something. Ever since COVID, like nobody's letting us use the bathrooms. When I have the urgency, I have to go or I'm going to pee on myself. And I'm not the only one with this issue. I've talked to many women. I've talked to women with cancer that have told me they have this same issue, but they don't want to talk about it. That happened today. I talked to somebody. So there's a lot of different issues going on. Another thing I want to talk about is in Tillicum, there's not a street going from Tillicum to Lakewood. They only have the I-5 corridor to get out. Where's the safety in that? And I know I've talked about this before already. Another thing I want to talk about is recreation centers in the different communities in our area. We need those. They're a priority. We have seen that the kids around the area don't have anywhere to go. That's cheap, that it's, inexpensive, that's free, because not everybody has income to spend. Another thing is I want to get you guys to take it seriously, to put into account the equity in Washington state here in Lakewood. You guys can be the leaders in that. I want to say that I haven't stopped thinking of Saeed Joaquin and his family. And I want to say justice for Saeed Joaquin. And I'm begging you and I'm asking you to please keep pushing forward for our community.
Thank you. That appears to be the last commenter online virtually, unless there are any other folks wishing to address the council on Zoom tonight. If so, please raise your hand so we can call on you. I see no additional hands virtually. Ms. Schumacher, do you?
Mayor, we have no other virtual hands raised.
And just I would point out both for the folks attending virtually as well as those in attendance, there is a public hearing this evening on the 2022 Cdbg annual action plan. So you certainly may be called upon or dial in at that time if you wish to address the council during that particular public hearing. Your attendance and comments would be helpful. So we now turn to those who have signed the sign-in sheet for in-person virtual comment tonight. The first is Mr. Kerry Hills.
Good evening, Mayor Whalen, council members, fellow citizens. My name is Kerry Hills. I grew up and have lived here in Lakewood all my life. I want to express my appreciation to the city, the Parks Department, Mary Dodsworth, for the wonderful parks that our city is able to enjoy. Other than roads and infrastructure, parks, I believe, get more use than any other city entity. I've seen the improvements at Harry Todd Park and been able to enjoy them. I understand there are some plans for American Lake Park and also at Wards Lake Park. The parks have a special place in my heart as I worked at both North American Lake and Harry Todd growing up when the county owned them. Most evenings during the summer, I can be found swimming around American Lake, utilizing both beaches as I tow my bright yellow kayak behind me. This summer, I was approved by the Lake Erie Open Water Swim Association to attempt a 24.2 mile swim nonstop across Lake Erie from Canada back to Pennsylvania. My slotted time is going to be the third week in July. This adventure started out as a bit of a joke with my brothers about 2 summers ago when I tried to convince them we should do it as a trio. While I was not able to persuade them, my hope is encouraged to others to support me as I've decided to use this swim as a fundraiser for Marybridge PICU. If you're not aware, Marybridge Hospital is in the process of building a standalone state-of-the-art facility in downtown Tacoma. I do not work for Mary Bridge or Multicare, but I would like to share how Mary Bridge has changed my life and helped me and my belief in miracles. In 2011, one of my children was taken to Mary Bridge via ambulance in a non-responsive state and remained in a coma for about a week. During the first 24 hours, Dr. Brian Boville said, even if she lived, there's probably going to be the chance of severe brain damage. All of the staff at the PICU were amazing. I find it a miracle the treatment team had the life-saving treatment she needed, a heart-lung bypass on an ECMO machine. But I find it more a miracle that my daughter suffered no known brain damage. As a parent, I'm very proud of her. She earned a degree from PLU. She gives back to the community with her employment and creativity, and she's fully independent. She's currently employed running a youth education program focused on the arts and technology. While our family was lucky enough to have insurance, I know many families don't, and that's why I started giving to Mary Bridge every year, many years ago. While I can never repay for the saving of my child's life, I can continue to provide financial support. I know each of you is more well-connected than I am, and I'm hopeful each of you can share my story as I attempt to complete this swim and raise $10,000 to support the PICU. I've given you a flyer with a place you can go and look and read more about my story. I'd like to thank you for your consideration. And without the parks here in Lakewood, I probably wouldn't be making this effort. And Councilmember Boki, if you could share maybe with your brother-in-law, Lance, I grew up swimming with him. Yeah, so thank you very much.
Thanks, Mr. Hills. Next on the list to address the council tonight, Helen Wagner.
Good evening. I am Helen Wagner. I live in Lakewood. I would like to express support for Council Member Bronstetter's proposal to designate the Gary Oak as Lakewood's tree. Such a move would spotlight one native oak and perhaps lead to greater respect for this tree. If the oak were to be our city tree, the very label would help preserve these slow-growing trees, which cannot be replaced since most of the specimens that are cut down because they are, quote, inconvenient, unquote, are centuries old. Had we had this designation that implies reverence for Gary Oaks, it is possible that more people would have fought to save the huge oak tree on the Oakwood Elementary School grounds. That tree was a sapling far before the Revolutionary War. The more of these giants that are destroyed, the more carbon dioxide becomes a problem. We cannot keep doing what we are doing and expect to pass on a livable community to our children. Please make the Gary Oak the Lakewood tree. Thank you.
Thank you. Next individual signed up is Mr. Jason Gerwin, but I think he was here for the Parks Proclamation, so I don't see Mr. Gerwin. We'll turn to James Dunlop next.
My name is James Dunlop and I'm a Lakewood resident. I'm commenting on the proposed 2.5 million square feet warehouse project in South Tacoma. The City Council has talked a lot about property rights. You buy a piece of land and you're free to capitalize on and destroy the land's natural resources. I'm wondering if the City Council has a similar attitude to its own administrative boundaries. Perhaps you are only concerned with what happens in Lakewood, and what happens elsewhere isn't your business. Yet you should know that everything is interconnected, and what happens in one place affects other places. You admit this happens on a state level, and this is reflected in your lobbying. For example, I went to the mayor's community coffee house on Law and Order, and I admit that Michael Zarrow made an effective presentation. He demonstrated that as a result of last year's passing of House Bill 1054, which restricted the ability of police to engage in vehicle pursuit, motor crime in Lakewood significantly increased. What happens in Olympia affects what happens in Lakewood. It's the same with the environment. Lakewood cannot isolate itself from the impact of the South Tacoma Warehouse project. There will be an estimated 5,000 extra vehicle trips a day, many of which will be semi-trucks. This will have an adverse impact on Lakewood's air quality. Furthermore, the Flett Creek area, which the city cites as an example of its environmental awareness, is threatened by the development. Like the air, creeks and waterways don't respect man-made boundaries. There is also a human dimension to the development. South Tacoma residents will have their lives upended, and many of them are private property owners whose investment will be trashed by Tacoma's collusion with corporate overreach. You've seen how much damage warehouse development has done to Woodbrook's residents, so I'm sure that will engender some empathy from you. So what do I want? I want the city of Lakewood to do everything in its power to challenge the warehouse development. It is not ultra vires because this development has a direct and detrimental impact on the well-being of Lakewood and its environment. Thank you.
Next, Mr. Bob Warfield.
Good evening, Mayor Whalen, council members. Bob Warfield, 143 Candlewick, 98499. It was wonderful to hear the proclamation that began this meeting tonight. That's not virtual, the appreciation that we have for our parks. I think every other word is playground, and surrounding it is trees, which we all appreciate. I wanted to speak about trees briefly tonight. For some years, preceding and following incorporation, Keep Lakewood Beautiful strove to provide volunteer effort toward related objectives. In the future, the Rose Murphy Endowment of Lakewood Community Foundation Fund will be dedicated to improving the public space of the city of Lakewood. That's a very broad mission statement right there. I have devoted considerable time and effort to support both, but critical to this endeavor are the substantive requirements and enforcement provisions of our municipal code, enlightened and supported by thoughtful citizens of community with a sensibility and an understanding as to what constitutes a scenic environment that provides health-giving character to community. I understand Mr. Brandstetter has offered a resolution regarding the Gary Oak, and I would hope that we could all be supportive of that. I thought the Gary Oak was our official tree, but perhaps that still needs to be done. Tennessee has a lot of oaks. They have 55 species. We have one. With homage to Joyce Kilmer, I think that I shall never see a poem as lovely as a tree whose hungry mouth is pressed against the earth's sweet flowing breast, a tree that looks at God all day and lifts her leafy arms to pray, a tree that may in summer wear a nest of robins in her hair, upon whose bosom snow is lain, who intimately lives with rain. Poems are made by fools like me, but only God can make a tree. From Lakewood to Savannah, thank God for Quercus Gariana. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Warfield. Thank you, Mr. Warfield. Next, we have Mary Jane Stockpole.
Good evening. My name is Mary Jane Stackpole, and I'm here to share some challenges that my family and I have faced as property owners in the Lakewood community. Our family has been part of Lakewood for many years. Our roots run deep. My siblings and I all were born and raised here. Our father, Harold Allen, owned and operated Harold Allen Company, realtors for over 60 years, and then it was led by my brother-in-law, Mike Larson. The building at 9805 Gravel Lake Drive is why I'm here. My father moved his business to Lakewood in 1958, and Allen Realtors was operated from this location until about a year ago, the 1st of June. It is for this reason that I stand before you. That same respect does not feel reciprocated by the city of Lakewood, and that our roots run really long and deep. Since the company relocated, we've been trying to find new tenants for the building on Gravel Lake Drive. Our efforts have been challenged by ever-mounting problems with little, almost zero support from local law enforcement. The building has been repeatedly tagged with graffiti on the outside and the inside and broken into and inhabited by vagrants. Garbage is everywhere. We've repainted, collected the garbage, but the problems continue. Individuals have broken into the building, windows have been broken, door frames have been broken, holes kicked in the walls, heaters jacked up, and power consumption increased. Mattresses, clothing, food waste, and drug paraphernalia have been strewn about the building. It is a senseless waste and vandalism. People are trespassing and destroying our property, consuming our power and heat, and yet we are responsible. How is this possible? We have called for support from the police department and have not received any. I waited 3 hours a couple months ago, calling 411 first and then 911, and I still didn't get any help. And I knew there was someone in the building. We spent thousands of dollars to haul away the garbage and to buy painting supplies and wood to board up all the windows. We're trying to market our building, and so we wanted to have a nice presence. So we spent all day Saturday custom fitting painted black pieces of wood so that it would not look like it was a boarded up facility. An entire day was spent by the 4 of us doing this. We want it to be very aesthetically pleasing. The process has been exhausting, frustrating, and maddening, and very sad. We've tried to be good stewards of Lakewood. We're trying to do our part, but we need help. This level of property damage, lack of support, and enormous financial burden are not sustainable for our little tiny business. We're asking you for some help. I signed in, and you have my email, and we are looking for some kind of a partnership. We've had police presence in years past. I understand times are different now. Well, I did have a nice relationship. Just they would email me and say, "You've got tagging." We'd say, "Thank you so much," and we'd take care of it. I look forward to seeing how we can move forward together and create a partnership, not in isolation, with the city of Lakewood. Thank you.
Thank you. And Ms. Stackpole, I believe that I've connected Mr. Larson with Chief Zarro so they can have a conversation. We really appreciate your comments tonight. So I'm hopeful that we can get something productive out of it. Thank you very much. Next on the list is Tracy Earls. Signed in. Ms. Earls. Is she outside, Ms. Dodsworth? While we're waiting for Ms. Earls, if there are any other individuals who would like to address the council during the public comment period, feel free to approach the podium. Ms. Minetti.
Hello, council members. I'm sorry, I forgot to sign in today. I was
That's fine.
waiting for everybody else. So my name is Christina Minetti. I live in Lakewood. And first, I'd like to ask you also to oppose the warehouse project in Tacoma, because it would be the 6th largest in the world, and it would have an impact here too. I'd also like to urge you to approve Councilmember Branstadter's proposal to make the Gary Oak of Lakewood's official tree. And I want to thank Mr. Branstadter for that also. This, of course, it should have been instituted decades ago. And by drawing attention to the oaks, such a resolution would have helped to fulfill in part the city of Lakewood's obligation as outlined in its own critical areas ordinance, LMC 14.154.010. And currently, the city is blatantly ignoring this part of its own municipal code, which states that it is the intent of that chapter to, quote, emphasize and encourage education, information, and voluntary action to enhance, protect, rehabilitate, and restore critical fish and wildlife species and habitats. I've never witnessed anything like information or education sponsored by the city of Lakewood related to Lakewood's critical fish and wildlife species and habitats. Never in my own time in the Clover Park School District, nor my son's time as a pupil there, was there anything, any curriculum related to our own special Gary Oak habitat. And this is, even though it qualifies as a critical area, as the hearing examiner reminded you on February 11th, if children learned about these trees and their habitats since preschool, the city might not be in the shocking and sad situation it is today with regard to the senseless destruction of the habitat. We know that children influence parents, of course, with the information that they learn at school, and might have even taken upon themselves to influence their elected officials. As it is, neither children nor adults are informed, and as a result, few take any interest in what is happening to Lakewood's environment. Moreover, I've never received any information by mail or otherwise from the city about the Gary Oaks on my own property or that of my parents. I've never witnessed the city make any effort at all to inform the residents of the city of the responsibility to protect and care for those special trees and their habitat. Look, for example, at the kind of materials used in British Columbia schools to teach about Gary Oak habitat. I'll let you see that. I'd like to request that not only that you approve Councilmember Branstad's proposal, but also that you arrange to have an Arbor Day proclamation and city-sponsored yearly observance of Arbor Day. After all, surely a city named Lakewood deserves no less. So thank you very much. Hey, how did I do that?
Thank you. Tracy Earls? Okay. Are there any other individuals present who wish to address council during the public comment period? Mr. Warfield. I think you've already had a shot there, but if you've got another poem.
20 seconds left. Recently, a lot of people have been thanking me for my service. Every time I go to Lowe's, I want to thank you for yours. Good night.
Thank you. If there are no other individuals in the audience wishing to address council in the public comment period, I'll declare the public comment period closed. We now move to the consent agenda. Madam Clerk.
A, approval of the minutes of the city council meeting of March 21st, 2022. B, approval of the minutes of the city council study session of March 28th, 2022. C, approval of the minutes of the city council meeting of April 4th, 2022. D, motion number 2022-26, authorizing the execution of an amendment to the agreement with R.L. Alia Company, increasing spending in the amount of $14,777.63 for the 111th Street Southwest and 112th Street Southwest between Bridgeport Way and Kendrick Street project. E, motion number 2022-27, authorizing the execution of an interlocal agreement between the City of Lakewood and Pierce County Library System to conduct and pay for library needs to serve the Lakewood and Tillicum communities, and authorizing the execution of a consulting contract with Burke and Associates. F, motion number 2022-28, authorizing the execution of an agreement for sewer and septic system improvements and for the demolition of dangerous structures at the Carwan Mobile Home Park located at 2621 84th Street Southwest. G, motion number 2022-29, authorizing the execution of a memorandum of understanding between Washington municipalities related to the opioid litigation. H, resolution number 2022-03, declaring certain real property located in Puyallup, Washington surplus property and authorizing the sale of real property. I, items filed in the office of the city clerk. 1, joint Parks and Recreation Advisory Board meeting minutes of February 22nd, 2022. 2, Planning Commission meeting minutes of March 2nd, 2022. 3, Planning Commission meeting minutes of March 30th, 2022.
Thank you. Is there any item on the consent agenda which any member of the council wishes to remove at this time? Mr. Branstadter.
Item E, Mr. Mayor.
Very well. Any other items any member of the council wishes to remove at this time? If not, do I have a motion to approve the consent agenda as presented minus item E?
Second.
It's been moved by Deputy Mayor Moss and seconded by Councilmember Anderson that we adopt the consent agenda as presented minus item E. We now turn to item E. Mr. Branstadter. or the vote, the consent agenda minus item E. Sorry about that. Any further discussion on the consent agenda as presented? Mr. Anderson.
So we're really probably for Mr. Caulfield. See that the item H is the sale of a drug forfeiture home on South Hill, which had been used in a grow operation. I understand the procedure. I understand why it's surplus. The question I have is, do we need to actually appropriate some money to essentially flip this and realize the best value out of it? Because if I take over a troubled property, I fix it before I sell it.
Councilmember Anderson and members of the council, we are in the process of making it road ready. We're not bringing in a stager or anything like that, but apparently the property was not badly damaged. This was a marijuana grow. They had some lighting fixtures in there. They've removed their fixtures. And the folks who've looked at it so far think, you know, maybe a few touch-ups like that, and we can handle that in the process and then reimburse from the proceeds. We are allowed to use the proceeds gained to reimburse any funding that we've used to do, as you say, flipping.
Thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome.
Any other questions? All those in favor of adoption of the consent agenda minus item E, signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Consent agenda minus item E has been adopted. We now turn to item E, motion 2022-27. Mr. Brandstetter, did you have comment or question on that?
We need a motion, Mr. Mayor. I move that we adopt motion number 2022-27.
Is there a second?
Second.
It's been moved by Councilmember Anderson, seconded by Councilmember Farmer, that we adopt motion 2022-27. Is there any further discussion on this item, Mr. Brandstetter?
Yeah, Mr. Mayor, my concern with item E is that although it is titled as a motion to adopt an interlocal agreement, it is essentially to a motion to award a contract to Burke Consulting for some public outreach in assisting a committee with doing that to develop some recommendations. So look at the future of library systems, facilities in Lakewood. And I'm concerned with non-competitively awarding this contract to Burke. Burke has done work for the city, and they've done some good work for the city, but they have primarily done it where in terms of planning of where we have had a particular outcome that we wanted to get to do that. And we've gone through and adopted plans and actions based on their work. And but this is a different sort of a process. This is to sort of facilitate some outreach in the community about where we should be going with our library facilities. And in all the work that Burke has done with us, public outreach has always been the weakest part of what they have delivered. They have generally, I would say that they have focused on making sure that we met regulatory minimums for public outreach. But in few of the work, they developed meaningful public outreach that influenced final outcomes. They just sort of check the boxes. This particular proposal, as it deals with facilitating a citizens committee to develop some planning, is, in reading it, there is little emphasis, no mention at all about reaching out to the diversity of the city. Okay, which is something that we ought to do. And in fact, actually implies that it's going to go through a process of where it's more a question of just working with some committee members and not particularly any specifics about outreach to the greater community. And I think that we maybe can find someone else that has better strengths in this type of work than Burke, just based on our experience with them or my perception of our experience with them in any event. So I would urge that we reconsider this, and I specifically am going to vote against the motion that's on the agenda today.
Mr. Anderson.
I'm not opposed to the selection of Burke, but I am opposed to the motion. It's the library district's job. It should be their money. They've dragged their feet for nearly a decade now. And I don't think it's appropriate to spend more city money until they show the initiative that they're actually going to do something.
Any other comments from members of the council? Ms. Farmer.
As a former library employee and having worked with Burke a number of times, I find their public outreach work more than acceptable. And so I take a little personal offense at the fact that it was an estimation that it was the weakest part of the work. However, I don't have the experience that you all have had here at the city. So I just wanted to tell you my personal experience with them at the library. Thank you.
My only comment on it, some of us have been here at least a decade or more, very hopeful that the library system would be moving forward in some direction. We've purchased property in Tillicum to nudge them forward. And as I understand the effort here, this was a city effort, if you will, to indicate a willing partnership to kind of continue to move the ball forward for the benefit of our Lakewood community. I don't know, Mr. Brandstetter, whether or not the library district completed their own master planning exercise. I understood that they were doing some of that, so I'm not sure how much outreach was done in that effort when they did their sort of engagement and master planning themselves. So this may or may not, maybe we don't have enough information on it, but this may or may not take the ball from where they left it at that point to move the issue forward for the benefit of the community. I guess I'm supportive of doing something, and if not us, who? If not now, when? That's my only concern, because this at least gets the ball moving forward. Ms. Bell.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I would be supportive of moving forward because I would like to see something done as being the newest member here. And so I don't know the history that this has been going on for quite some time. As far as Burke goes, I have worked with them also. I would love to see in more detail what their communication, their outreach plan would be, and to reach the diverse communities like you mentioned. I would assume we don't have their full outreach plan yet. So that is something that when we get to that point, I would love to see that. And then we could verify that there's certain things that are going to be done and utilized there. Thank you.
And I believe this is a $30,000 ask on the city side, right? It's a split of the 60. Is that correct, Mr. Caulfield? Okay. Any further discussion on the motion that has been moved and seconded and is on the table? Any further discussion? If not, all those in favor of motion 2022-27 signify by saying aye.
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 All those opposed?
Nay.
It appears it's a 5-2 affirmative vote. Motion 2022-27 passes. We now turn to the regular agenda, public hearings and appeals. This is the date set for a public hearing on the fiscal year 2022 Community Development Block Grant CDBG Annual Action Plan. And for this, I'd like to call on our program manager, Jeff Gum, who will join us virtually for an overview.
Good evening, Mayor Whalen, Deputy Mayor Moss, and council members. So as the mayor said, tonight is the public hearing on the fiscal year 2022 annual action plan. The annual action plan will run from July 1st, 2022 through June 30th, 2023. It does allocate funding for the Community Development Block Grant Program, as well as the Home Investment Partnership Act, the home programs. This process did begin in October 27th of 2021 when the city held a public hearing on community development, economic development, housing needs, and public services for the city of Lakewood. So the two funding sources, Cdbg and home, can be used for any of those activities. From that meeting, the city did put together a draft annual action plan. It was presented to both the City Council and Community Service Advisory Board over a number of different meetings and review processes. At this point, we are involved in the 30-day public comment period. The public comment period started April 1st. It runs through April 30th. Tonight is the April 18th public hearing. From this point moving forward, if approved by council, it would be submitted to HUD on May 13th of 2022. The one caveat being that HUD has not yet announced its fiscal year 2022 allocations, and they do anticipate to doing that approximately May 13th, the date that we're set to submit. So if for any reason that is delayed, then the annual action plan would be delayed until HUD has announced that. So the funds that we're having a hearing tonight, again, are home and Cdbg. The home proposed funding is a total allocation of $547,966.90. That does include reprogrammed funds as well as program income. The programs that are looking to be funded in accordance with the draft annual action plan would be the Home Affordable Housing Fund. That is proposed to be funded in the amount of $327,781.58. Down payment assistance is proposed to be funded in the amount of $187,751.32. And administration would be funded in the amount of $32,434. The note for the administration would be that would be to fund the city of Tacoma as part of the home consortium. The city of Tacoma is the lead, and the city pays the city of Tacoma to do certain administrative duties for us and report to HUD as well. So that is the home recommendations. The Cdbg recommendations for fiscal year 2022 consist of total funding of $814,036.67. Those funds, again, do consider reprogrammed Cdbg funds as well as program income. The funding as recommended as part of the draft 2022 annual action plan include major home repair program funded at the amount of $256,512.87. A down payment assistance program funded in the amount of $75,000. Pierce County Housing Authority, Village Square and Oakleaf Apartments rehabilitation in the amount of $200,000. A services program known as Cdbg Emergency Payments Program funded in the amount of $100,000. A Cdbg Administration of Home Housing Services Program funded in the amount of $15,000. Administration funded in the amount of $117,523.80, and an NSB1 abatement program recommended funding at $50,000. So those are the allocations in the 2022 annual action plan, and I turn back to the mayor.
Thank you, Mr. Gum. Are there any questions for Mr. Gum? Mr. Boki first, Mr. Anderson, and then maybe Mr. Brandstetter. Do you have your light on? Okay, Mr. Boki.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Mr. Gum, thank you for your presentation. Help me with a couple of terms here. Cdbg, let's go to the Cdbg funding recommendations. CDBG Emergency Payments Program, $100,000. Need for accessible, culturally competent services. It'll be 35 to 50 households and 80 individuals. 35 to 50 households with for $100,000. Can you give us some examples of what that entails?
So under the CDBG rules, you can have a program that provides what would be considered emergency payments to low-income individuals. The payment program, as we're proposing it, would be to fund housing-related services, human services things. What we noticed or at least coming out of the COVID pandemic and during the pandemic, was there was a number of rental housing programs that did provide assistance for individuals for housing. Things that were missed were things like payments for other bills that they may be behind on, say phone bills, utility bills, like a sewer bill, some of those things. None of those were covered by any of the rental assistance programs. And there's still a number of people that are behind on those types of bills. So the city could pay those bills for low-income households. We could pay for things like bus passes for low-income individuals that are getting jobs coming out of the pandemic and working elsewhere. They could be used for rent assistance, not looking to do rent assistance, but if there was somebody who was being evicted for a smaller amount of funds, then we could potentially do that. The services end of it is kind of what we were looking to do, is pay some of the other bills that were not covered initially. It really is kind of an unlimited services allocation that CDBG does allow. We were looking to restrict the funding source to no more than $4,000 per household. And realistically, I'd like to stay at about half of that number. So $2,000, that would get us to the 80 individuals served relatively quickly.
So do you use outside groups to help you locate these people, or how do we locate these folks?
We do intend on doing some of that. So we do get a lot of referrals from Pierce County Human Services. There's a number of calls that we get forwarded from Pierce County Human Services. There's, as you all know, the LASA, the organization here, there's a number of individuals that go to LASA and get services that have additional needs that LASA can't cover, and Pierce County rental assistance does not cover. So we would look to partner with them, and even potentially with the city of Tacoma. Again, I mean, there's a number of human services personnel that work in the different programs and refer people either to the city of Tacoma or to Lakewood or Pierce County. So it's kind of a collaborative affair between all of the cities, as well as LASA and some of the housing authorities here to get people into the services that they need. So we would look to continue that.
So the next one I apologize for, because I think I've asked you every time you're here talking about CDBG. Housing major home repair, $256,512. Housing instability, including homelessness, 10 households. And so identify, well, tell us how you identify the households, and then again, explain to me how you collaborate on the county's programs, because the county has a number of home repair or insulation kind of things. How does this differ from those programs?
It's a good question. It's a program we've been doing for a number of years, so it seems to be kind of old hat, and not everybody is as familiar as I am. So it's a good question. The way that we get the word out is we typically advertise in the Lakewood Connections. There's flyers that we do send out every once in a while. We have sent them out with water bills, utility bills, and so forth to get the word out about our programs. It's kind of organically grown over the years. So people have had assistance and have provided that information to neighbors and so forth. So Some of it is word of mouth, but there is a decent amount of advertising that we do in the community to get the information out there. It's a program that we repair low-income individuals' homes that are owner-occupied. So whatever they may need for repairs, plumbing, sewer, water, roofing, windows, doors, electrical repairs, ADA, any improvements that they need on their house that they would otherwise be unable to afford. A majority of the clientele over the years have been elderly, single member households. We have a very large percentage of households that are lived in by elderly single females. So it's a situation where the husband has passed along and they no longer have the income to maintain their houses. So we've gone in and helped those. As for collaborations with Pierce County and so forth, we do collaborate with the county on some of their weatherization programs. They have a number of different programs. Some of them the city can access and some of them the city cannot access. The weatherization is one that we can and do. We haven't used it all that much over the last couple of years because construction over the last couple of years has kind of lagged and numbers of repairs have gone down, but we do intend to continue that partnership moving forward.
Thank you.
Mr. Anderson.
Thank you. I would note on that program, there's great difficulty in finding contractors. But yeah, a couple of questions on table 2. Down payment assistance, $75,000 to one lucky winner. Is that we actually would appropriate $75,000 to one household that gets a down payment?
Yes, there's 2 different down payments. So the Cdbg, as you mentioned, was $75,000. There would be an allocation for home as well, but the cap would be $75,000 for down payment assistance, and it would be to assist one household. I believe we could potentially assist more than one household. We recently completed a down payment assistance and we spent $27,500 for that individual to allow them to purchase their house. The issues that I'm seeing right now is house valuations. Obviously, as all you are aware and have seen the issues with the Pierce County housing market, the values are increasing nearly daily, it seems like, and low-income individuals are having a really hard time trying to keep up with that, find the down payment to actually purchase a house. There's a number of state programs that we would partner with. There's Home Start, there's Home First. A number of the lenders and so forth have down payment assistance programs. So the funds would match the specific one that you're mentioning, Councilmember Anderson. The Cdbg down payment assistance is a 50% match. So whatever other down payment assistance programs they can put into their housing package, we would match that at a 50% number.
Is that a loan or a grant?
That would be a loan. It's typically a 30-year, if it's behind a 30-year loan, we typically go in 30 years. If it's 15 years, we would go with a 15-year loan. And it's a deferred loan, typically carrying 1% interest.
So that's where the program income comes from in table 1 is from repayments?
Yes, Cdbg, major home repair repayments, as well as down payment assistance repayments.
I'm going to ask you for a judgment call here. Housing major home repair. We have a lot of 50, 60-year-old single-family houses in Lakewood. There are a lot of widows that need a roof or can't maintain things to code standards. Is it more important to maintain affordable housing and keep those people in their homes than it is to help a couple of people with a down payment?
That's a good question. I always tend to defer to maintaining what we have and managing what we have, especially if you've got somebody in a house, to keep them in a house. That to me is the biggest priority and should be the highest priority. doesn't necessarily take away from down payment assistance to bring somebody into Lakewood and hopefully create that lifelong resident. I mean, it's another worthy program as well. But if I'm making that call, I would always say maintain what we have, keep what we have affordable, and make sure that it's safe and decent.
Last question. With respect to Table 2, third item, Pierce County Housing Authority, is that $200,000 entirely deferred maintenance?
Oh, primarily deferred maintenance. There's some issues that I would say are just standard, not necessarily deferred. I mean, on a schedule, there's certain things that they would be doing, whether they were doing deferred maintenance or not. So it's 90-10 realistically deferred maintenance to just things that would come up in the typical replacement schedule.
Now, I said I misrepresented it in the last question, because going back to the housing major home repair, is there do you think there's a demand over the $256,000?
Oh, every year there's I would say the demand exceeds what we allocate to it. I believe 2 years ago we allocated $526,000, somewhere in that ballpark. We have not expended all of those funds. I do anticipate those funds to last about another, say, 2 or 3 months. So there's going to be a little bit of carryover. So the budget won't be 256. It's probably going to be around 325 when we start. So there will be a little bit of carryover.
Thank you.
Any further questions? Mr. Gum? So Mr. Gum, I have a process question for you. If in response to a council member's question about perhaps reallocation, is that something possible in advance of the public hearing, or the public hearing should be on the table recommendations as presented, right?
It is possible to reallocate funds anytime before approval. If council does choose, we come back on May 2nd for approval. If council does choose to reallocate $75,000, it could be reallocated to something else. If they chose to put funding somewhere else, it could also be moved around. So there is chance yet to move funds.
And we can do that post the public hearing process tonight, correct? Before approval.
Yes, the only thing that I would say is there isn't necessarily a hard and fast rule, but it's one of those things where if let's say we were going down this process and everything was completely changed, that I would suggest, hey, we probably need another 30-day public comment period because we've changed everything. Changing one line item out of 7 or 8 different line items, especially if it's a $75,000 figure, that's a small fraction of the fundings. That's not a substantial change.
Okay. Well, if there are no other questions of Mr. Gum, we will now turn to the public comment for this public hearing. If you'd like to provide virtual testimony on the public hearing, you can join the Zoom meeting as an attendee by calling the telephone dial number listed on the screen and entering the meeting ID number listed there. Please use the raise the hand feature so we can call on you during the public comment period. I see that we have one person signed in for the public hearing here in the audience. I'll call on that person first, and then Ms. Schumacher will advise if we have any virtual public commenters during the public hearing. Mr. Jim Stretz is signed in to address the council during the public hearing.
Good evening, Mayor and members of the council. Thank you for this opportunity to speak. And we appreciate the help that staff has given us in this application process. I'm Jim Stretz, the Executive Director of the Pierce County Housing Authority. And there were some questions that were brought up earlier when this board or this council reviewed, and I'm here to answer any questions. I wrote a letter answering, I thought, what the intent was. I could briefly speak to the deferred maintenance issue. Part of it is we have one of our elderly tenants drove her car into her apartment, and We have a big insurance claim on that, and that's going to be done in about $80,000 out of our own pocket. This is something, these are our smaller communities that we own. They're not public housing. They are paid for by the enterprise, meaning the Public Housing Authority, out of excess revenue, purchase these communities and rents them out at 40% below market to those people at 30% or low. So we have very low rent, none of it's subsidized. So if we don't get it subsidized, we'll raise the rents, and that'll be harder on the tenants. We have a contract with Share Care to provide services for our tenants. And the monies that we are asking for will make us a better neighbor. We'll dress up the place a little bit. Although not all of it is deferred, some of it is. Not to say we would never eventually get to it, because we do have a very capable staff, and during the bad publicity we received over the last couple of years, no one ever went unpaid. So we do have a good staff and a good responsible staff left over. We replaced half of our leadership team. We replaced half of our board with some very, very capable board members who have excellent community ties and responsibilities that they've carried out over the years. So we're fortunate for that. So that's all.
Well, thank you, sir, for addressing the council tonight during the public comment period. Are there any other members here in the audience wishing to address the council during the public hearing? If not, we will turn to the virtual participants during this public hearing process. The first is Mr. Dennis Haugen. And please focus on the subject matter of the public hearing, Mr. Haugen.
Excuse me, can you hear me now?
Yes.
Yeah, I had a real estate license there in Lakewood for about 35 years. And I would say run away from any down payment assistance program, especially when the market is in a heated situation like it is now. If that is there, if that program is there, you can bet that a realtor is going to get somebody into that program. And what from experience, and there's plenty of appraisers and plenty of mortgage brokers and whatnot that are in jail today because of what happened after 2009, 10, right in there, when the market dropped and suddenly there's no value there. You'd be much better off just sticking with helping people repair houses that are unable to do it. But I would definitely not recommend doing a down payment assistance program. Usually it means attaching it along with another loan, and if the price drops after, which it usually does after a hot market, then you just stuck that debt somewhere. Somebody's got to pay it. And I've often seen a lot of those homes suddenly go vacant. And so I'd stay away from, you're not helping anybody with a down payment program, because it's just better to go leave the system alone when it comes to purchases. It's got its own protections that have been built in over the years, and stick with something different. Thank you.
Thank you. The next individual who is signed in to address council during the public hearing is Ms. Amelia Escobedo.
Amelia Escobedo.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay, sorry. It was double mute. I wanted to say thank you for the Cdbg funds that you guys do offer. My family is going to get helped with that program. And although it was a pain to have to mess with my mortgage company, they made it such a pain just to get paperwork done between back and forth, like a real pain. Like it was the most stress I've ever gone through in my life. So yeah, just on that part. I mean, I'm glad that I get to get that help from my family and I don't lose my home because of it. But I just want to say thank you for that. And I think for if you do change the funds for what you're talking about, instead of doing a down payment, I think what would be good is paying like a lot of times now for families to get into places, they have to pay first month's, last month's, and plus the month of the rent. So that would be awesome to see maybe. Another thing is maybe trying to figure out a way to not house the homeless, but maybe putting funding into like a lot where people can park safely, like if they live in their vehicles or something like that. And I love the gas voucher idea. I mean, the bus, but I would also suggest a gas voucher for people, especially for the gas prices right now are really high. Right now, I'm commuting to college from UW back and forth, and I have a mini SUV. So that's a lot of gas back and forth. And that's all I wanted to say was thank you.
Thank you very much. Are there any other individuals who are attending virtually tonight who wish to address the council during the public hearing? Any other members of the public wish to address the council during the public hearing on the 2022 fiscal year community development block grant CDBG annual action plan? Any other members of the public wishing to address the council during this public hearing? If not, I'll declare the public hearing closed. We now turn to unfinished business. Is there any unfinished business, Mr. Caulfield?
There's none, Mayor.
We then turn to new business. Madam Clerk, motion 2022-30.
Motion number 2022-30, authorizing the execution of an agreement with McKinsey in the amount of $126,863 for the Lakewood City Hall redesign study.
And for this, I believe we have City Manager Assistant Michael Vargas, who will meet us virtually to give us an overview.
Good evening, Mayor, Deputy Mayor, council members.
Good evening.
Michael Vargas here, and I would like to go over the City Hall redesign study scope of work. So this scope of work comes from the contractor competitively chosen to carry out the study, the architecture, design, and planning for McKinsey. So to give a bit of background, myself and what I will refer to as a core team, which is composed of several department directors and city staff, have reviewed the scope of work before everyone this evening, and this is the negotiated version we landed on with the McKinsey team. So I would like, if we could refer to page 247 of your packet. That is where the scope of work document begins. But specifically, let's turn to page 249. This is where the actual scope of work items begin. So just to give a very high level overview, this scope of work, this project is composed of two phases. Phase one is the needs assessment, and phase two is the floor plan and cost development stage. And this project in total will take about 4 months to complete. So I will go over the salient points here for phase one needs assessment. So in this phase, the McKinsey team will obtain the overall project vision from key stakeholders in the process, which is to include the core team and myself. After this initial sort of visioning meeting, the space allocation needs for each department through in-depth interviews with department directors will be obtained. This will be compiled into a programming document that will be used in phase 2. And also during this phase, an all staff online survey will be implemented, which has the dual purpose of both informing directors' decisions on space allocation needs and also helps to create buy-in amongst city staff for this project. And at the end of this, the core team will review the initial space allocation document for approval before moving on to phase 2. And moving forward, each of these milestones will be approved of by the core team before moving on to the next step. So we have we're very much involved in this process all along the way. So moving on to the next page, on page 250, this is the phase 2 floor plan development and cost estimation phase. So the McKenzie team will create the initial stacking plans, which delineate how departments are arranged in the building. And this will be developed from the results from the needs assessment phase. So after stacking plans have been approved by the core team, 3 floor plans delineated by low, medium, and high impact will be developed, which incorporate the approved space allocations for each department from phase 1, as well as the overall project vision. And also during this phase, an existing building and systems assessment will inform floor plan development as well, just in case any of the floor plans actually involve any renovations. We would need to, take into account the building and systems as well. So after approval of the 3 floor plans, cost estimation for each floor plan will begin to include preliminary construction costs if the floor plan calls for any renovations. And after approval of the cost estimates, a final review of the deliverables, such as the stacking plans, floor plans, and cost estimates will occur by the core team. And here a recommendation on the preferred floor plan by the core team will be developed. And phase 2 ends with a presentation by the McKenzie team to City Council, which provides an overview of the project and the deliverables with a recommended floor plan and cost estimate. And if we could go to page 251, here at the top of the page, the fee summary, the final cost of this scope of work is not to exceed that figure there, $121,863. I would also like to note that there is a 5% ARPA administration fee that is based off of the $100,000 allocated from the ARPA funds that will also be applied. So bringing the final total to $126,863. And the rest of the document here is composed of assumptions and exclusions, which were agreed to by the core team and McKenzie. And we also have the hourly rates from the subcontractors that McKenzie will be using for the cost estimates and the systems and building assessment. And with that, that concludes my presentation. And I invite any comments or questions from the council. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Vargas. I appreciate you appearing tonight virtually. We won't ask you to stand up.
Yeah.
Any questions of Mr. Vargas by council? Mr. Brandstetter.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. And Mr. Vargas, thanks for giving us an overview of the project here. My question had to do with, I have some questions around the sustainability elements of the redesign. There's no reference in the document here towards, we recently adopted a climate change environmental chapter in our comprehensive plan, which it included some goals and some things that we would hope to accomplish, and we're working on finalizing an action plan that would make the city, I'm not sure what verb to use, but greener, I suppose. But reducing our carbon footprint and such. So there isn't any specific reference to the comprehensive plan or that the consultant considering those items in the comprehensive plan. On page 251, if I can look at it, there is an assumption that says the client will not be pursuing sustainability certification for the project. And that, I guess that makes sense because sustainability certification generally is if you're going to build a new building and you want something like that. But that's not the same as that we want the project to advance the goals in the comprehensive plan. That's not that's different than that. And that isn't addressed. And I think that I would like for them to, at least to the extent possible, come up with a recommendation as they do this work that moves us in the direction that we want to move as we documented in the comprehensive plan. The other thing is that if I could look at page 252, and there is a list of exclusions. And am I understanding it? This is a list of all the things that the contractor won't do or won't recommend?
Thank you, Councilmember Brandstetter. That is correct. The exclusions are all items that will not be pursued by the contractor McKenzie. That's correct. So these are all the things they will not be doing that they would like to explicitly spell out. Yep.
Yeah. Well, if you take the next.
Okay, I guess that I was a little bit surprised by a couple of them. One of them being acoustical engineering design, which we constantly hear about this room and elsewhere in the city hall about being able to hear or do things there. And I would think that, and while maybe this room may be the least of the rooms impacted by this project, I think that the consideration of acoustical engineering and the costs associated with it of anything that we decide to put in, like in the court or here or elsewhere, seems to be something we would want to have to be able to do that. And I guess that's the only, the most specific one that we have. I was wondering about not using CAD drawings, because I kind of thought CAD drawings were sort of part and parcel with doing this kind of work. But maybe it's a question of a level of detail and what that means. Anyway, but my primary concern is the comprehensive plan elements in the climate change chapter that being brought to the attention of the contractor so that they consider them, okay, and attempt to advance them to the extent possible and not proceed on an assumption that they don't need to worry about them.
Yes, thank you for the comments, Councilmember Brandstetter. Just to speak to that, rest assured that it is myself and the core team, it is our duty to represent the city's City Council's goals, and also that includes those in the comprehensive plan related to sustainability throughout the process. So that will be advocated for certainly. As we move along through all the items, there is an approval check by the core team at every stage. So we will ensure that, changes are indeed sustainable and align with our comprehensive plan goals.
I had one question. If I don't see any others with questions, on page 248, it discusses the project goals in the program. We understand we're looking in part to maximize workflow, perhaps reducing the staff utilization to 2 floors as opposed to all 3, so we could perhaps rent out the 3rd floor. One of the program project goals to me, in addition to where it says in number 3, maximize workflow, collaboration, and service provision efficiency throughout the City Hall building for staff, I also think it should be for the public, because it seems to me we want to make sure that we maximize the utilization of the City Hall for services to the public as well. And perhaps that's implicit, but I get any number of comments from folks where sometimes they don't feel it's as accessible for planning and permitting. And I know that may be more programmatic than a building function, but I would hope to want to make sure that the building functionality works not just for those of us in the building, for those who are coming from outside the building to access services. So that would be my thought on project goal there. In addition to it, I see a few nodding of heads as well. So just remember the public in your analysis and work as a core team. Mr. Anderson.
Just a follow-on comment to that. I've had experience obtaining permits and working with the building folks in Olympia, and they have a particularly accessible area where you go to the 2nd floor, it's open, there's a counter, they have tables out there, you spread your plans out, you just walk into it and take your turn.
You can actually meet with a human.
Yeah. And so it would be nice to see that open concept adopted.
Ms. Bell.
Yeah, thank you. Don't we have a permitting system though that's mostly online? They don't need to bring in all their stuff. I think it probably should be a good hybrid space would be good. Okay.
Anyone else? Mr. Vargas, thank you for your presentation and your work on this. So if there are no other questions, we will now seek a motion to adopt motion 2022-30.
Second.
It's been moved by Councilmember Anderson, seconded by Deputy Mayor Moss, that we approve motion 2022-30. Any further discussion? All those in favor signify by saying aye.
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 Any opposed? Motion has been adopted. We now turn to reports by the city manager.
Good evening, Mayor, Deputy Mayor, and council members. First off, we have before you this evening 2 policy proposals. The first will be presented by our Assistant City Manager, Dave Buer, which is a proposed ordinance related to cluster style mailboxes. And then once Mr. Buer is completed, our city attorney would like to cover with you an update to your code as it relates to including language that would allow for city committee members, board members, and the like to be removed if the situation were to ever arise. So with that, first, Mr. Buer.
Thank you, Mr. Manager and members of the council. You have a memo before you beginning on page 259, followed by a draft ordinance. This comes by you by way of a request from the council. The draft ordinance regards the requirement for cluster style mailboxes. The ordinance addresses the requirement for the installation and maintenance of cluster mailboxes on new streets, either public or private, as well as when we do major reconstruction projects that necessitate the removal of existing mailboxes and their subsequent replacement. When this draft ordinance was under preparation, we started looking at it specifically just for street reconstruction projects where we take down mailboxes and put new ones. But it occurred to me that when we build new subdivisions, new residential subdivisions, either public or private, generally it makes more sense to make the same requirement as well. So the draft ordinance was written to take into account both effects for new residential subdivisions of greater than 3 lots and does not include commercial and industrial acts, by the way. And then speaks to reconstruction of major streets and the installation of the cluster mailboxes, addresses the issues of ownership and maintenance as well as liability. This would be incorporated into our site development rules and regulations, Title 12. It will be, I think the new number would be titled Chapter 12.19. If this is something that the City Council wants to proceed with, we will bring it back as a formal ordinance for council consideration and action. And really that concludes my comments to the council. If you have any questions, I'll try to answer them.
Thank you. I have a question. I'll throw it to Mr. Boki in just a minute. The section excludes binding site plans.
That's commercial industrial projects.
Got it. Okay. Mr. Boki?
So is this really codifying what is already our policy or the post office's policy?
Yes and yes.
Okay, so if you're putting in a new subdivision, the post office no longer allows people to have their own little mailbox.
Well, the post office doesn't require cluster mailboxes per se. Their preference is that they be installed.
Okay. And meaning cluster, meaning 6 or 8 to a.
It depends, but here we're defining it more than 3 lots for residential.
Okay. Okay. But presumably it would probably, okay, it would be more or less.
Yeah,
or-
and generally I don't see this as a problem in residential subdivisions because it's kind of happening anyway.
Okay. Great, thank you.
The one thing I would add is that in future requirements with these subdivisions, we're going to make sure that there is a homeowners association. So this specific issue is addressed in the association bylaws. In my research, I found out that many association bylaws do not cover cluster mailboxes.
Okay.
I know more about cluster mailboxes than I ever wanted to.
Well, then I won't ask any more questions.
Yeah. Mr. Brandstetter, then Mr. Anderson.
Okay, well, Mayor, yes, thank you, Mr. Buer. I think, as Mr. Boki says, this will go a long way towards codifying and making clear to folks what has been policy, but that was either not well known or overlooked because it wasn't established by an ordinance to do that. So I think that will help us going forward. I had one question in the draft ordinance under street reconstruction, section B, number 4 on responsibilities of the city. Why, if you are driving a community and economic development vehicle and you run into a mailbox, would the city replace it? But if Chief Zorro takes his patrol car and runs into a mailbox, would we not replace it?
Well, that was a question that I asked, and I referred to that to the city attorney, and there was actually some cases where this came up, and the city is not required to replace it if a police vehicle were to strike a mailbox. Perhaps
And again, it comes down to just because we're not required. I think if one of our patrol vehicles damages a mailbox, I think we should. I wouldn't say, well, it was a police car, so it's on you to the property owner. I'd really like to strike that exclusion from this. Now, because I assume if a fire truck hits it, West Pierce
Exactly.
should assume responsibility, and if the sheriff's department's call of Pierce County. But for a city owned law enforcement vehicle, I don't really feel comfortable writing an exclusion in.
I was just happy to see that they didn't require the mailbox owner to repair the police vehicle. Mr. Anderson.
What he said.
Yeah.
And I would also, or no matter what the legal out, maybe it wouldn't cover everything because the police car could be totally negligent and it wouldn't be excluded from liability. Or they could have a cop that's intoxicated.
It's not going to prevent anyone from filing a claim against the city. I understand that.
I don't want to defend not fixing it when we hit it.
Sounds like we have concurrence on that to exclude the exclusion. And my only other comment, to be really clear based upon some experience Mr. Brandstetter and I had with a local resident, if you look at language in B3, which is also similar to the language in A7, where it says in A7, for instance, subsequent maintenance of the box units and concrete pad shall be the responsibility of the users after the installation. I think you should add language subsequent maintenance, repair, or replacement in both instances, because you don't want someone to say, well, gee, I only have to maintain it. But if someone hits it, or I hit it myself personally, I think it's just more clear.
Mayor Whalen, you said repair, replacement, and what was the third one?
It should be maintenance, comma, repair, or replacement. Subsequent maintenance, repair, or replacement of the box units and concrete pads shall be the responsibility of the users / property owners of the cluster style mailboxes. So it's the second sentence in B3, and it looks to be the 7th paragraph, A7, second sentence again. Subsequent maintenance, repair, or replacement of the box units. Repair or replacement, I'm adding, yeah. Yeah, I think it makes a little bit more clarity there. Any other wordsmithing? Thank you.
Thank you.
Appreciate it. Next, you have the item with Ms. Wagner.
Good evening, Mr. Mayor, Deputy Mayor, and members of the council. The item before you at this time under the manager's reports has to do with appointment and removal of appointees to your commissions and committees. I think there has been some question regarding when we have commission or committee members that maybe can't attend the meetings. It turns out once they're appointed, or for other reasons, the council has wondered if they can be set free to do other things short of the term that they're appointed for. And any of these appointments are really a delegation of your authority. You delegate either the authority to do some public hearings or a particular task or a particular body of work. That's why you review their work plans every year. And so, yes, you absolutely can terminate someone shy of their full term. I think that what the council was more interested in is not whether or not you can do it, but is it clear in the rules that you've set out for them? So what we've offered you is an insertion of language that is already in the salary commission language. And so it would mirror that language for each and every body that you make appointments to. I would be happy to try and answer any questions you might have in that regard. It's a pretty simple fix, despite it looking a little bit bulky with all those sections being added.
Any questions? Do we need to add language like that to the ad hoc committee structure? Because that's not, maybe I missed it. Is that referenced in here as well?
Well, your ad hoc committees tend to be one by one. They aren't necessarily found directly in the code. They sort of come up organically, much like the tree committee did. Again, I would say that your authority can be given or taken away as you wish as a council. You could establish that when you create an ad hoc committee in particular. The committees that are listed here are the ones that are ongoing, that are recognized in your code. So this would be part of the municipal code.
Section 8.
Correct. Yeah, it's in section 8. Thank you. Any other questions, Mr. Branstetter? And then it looks like Mr. Anderson.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Mayor. So Audrey, is there a statutory reason why the lodging tax committee would not be included in this?
The lodging tax committee gets you into a little bit of a thicket because the RCW requires a certain balance of members. And we have been as flexible as we can to maintain the legislatively required balance. So for example, if either the hoteliers or the tourism folks just happened to not have what you were looking for in committee membership, they just weren't living up to it, you can't take away like all the tourism folks and leave only hoteliers or vice versa. It's a balance that's legislatively required. So I would want to visit that carefully before I would eliminate anyone. In fact, if you were going to take someone away from that balance, you would probably have to take away two in order to keep the balance where it's required to be.
But my understanding of this ordinance is if a member, if this is particularly related to the malfeasance, incompetence, incapacity element, that we ought to have that, and we ought to be giving, as we are in this ordinance, to the mayor the authority to do that with a lodging tax committee member, as with all the others, recognizing that you have to swiftly find a replacement, or you have to, as we've done in the past, take away voting privileges from one of the other types of members in order to maintain the balance, and we've had to do that in history. But I would think that we would want the same process to apply, because members of that committee aren't immune to this matter here. And if that could be added into the ordinance, it isn't necessarily, hopefully we never have to use any of this. It would be really nice, but going off. Then my other question was, why is the youth council not included in this, as they are appointed in the same way as others, and we're building leaders, and we should build that by also building in expectations.
And Councilmember Branstetter, I think the perspective on the youth council was that that's considered somewhat of an educational opportunity and not designed to afford the kind of punitive action you would put on a 17-year-old to say that they were summarily ousted by the city council of Lakewood. I mean, I suppose that's not the kind of thing that haunts you for the rest of your life, but it's just not the same kind of committee as the others. But again, that's a policy choice for the council.
I guess I have high expectations for the folks that we put on the youth council. We do have youth council members who participate in many of these other committees as liaisons, that we educate them in terms of the code of ethics and public meetings and things to do that. So in terms of treating them as equals with other committees, I would suggest that we could incorporate them. And then the other group that I had that wasn't here, and maybe it's because we don't do that, is the Civil Service Commission. Does the Civil Service Commission have an alternative process? Because they're actually appointed by the city manager, I believe.
Yes, Councilmember Branstetter, the Civil Service Board is independent of a delegation of authority from the council.
Okay. And then I guess the last question that I had has to do with the process that's recommended. As I understand the way it reads is the mayor can make the decision to remove someone based upon his making the determination that one of those standards has been met. And then he informs the council, and then the council could, if a majority of the council wanted to, could reverse his decision. How does that actually look like on a council agenda? You know, when we appoint people, we have it agendized of where the majority of the council confirms the mayor's appointment. Would it actually appear on the agenda to confirm his dismissal? Or would some council members have to ask for an item to be on the agenda to cause someone's dismissal to not take place?
Councilmember Brandstetter, it would look the former way that you described.
So we would see it on the agenda, the notification, and it would ask for our concurrence?
Correct.
Okay. Okay. All right, that's all that I have. Thank you, Ms. Walker.
Who wants to go then? Me, Mr. Anderson or Mr. Boki?
I'd just like to speak to the Lodging Tax Committee. I concur that it should be included. Having chaired that for any number of years, I recognize the statutory requirement and the difficulty of keeping that balance. But as Mr. Brandstetter indicated, the way we've dealt with it before has been satisfactory on an ad hoc basis. We had to have somebody recuse himself and not participate in the process of allocations to keep the balance. Otherwise, staff is scrambling to find a replacement, usually a replacement for somebody representing the industry, because somebody's transferred or a property's been sold or something. So it's worked, but I think we do need the process, and it may be that somebody just doesn't show up but doesn't resign. I mean, it's simple as that.
Yeah, it makes sense. Mr. Boki, you had a question?
Yeah, a couple of questions. Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Remind me, Ms. Wachter, what we have now.
Councilmember Boki, what you have now is the authority to do what would now be codified. You're able to remove members now. I think the question was more that if you find yourselves in that situation where you're looking at a committee member and thinking this person needs to be removed, there's not language there to really hang your hat on. It gets more into the inherent authority of the council, and that the council finds it to be more straightforward and informative to the committee members if they know from the get-go that that authority exists.
Okay. And when you put this together, did you do any research on what other cities do?
Other than knowing that we have it in our salary commission language, which was taken straight out of state law, I did not look at other cities. Again, it's an inherent authority. I will tell you from a legal perspective, while this is absolutely true language, if we got into territory where we're going to say that somebody's committed malfeasance while a volunteer for the city, you have problems beyond what the code says at that point. We will be probably talking in executive session and so forth,
Well,
if that's what it is.
And that was my next question here. You use words incapacity and competence. I laugh at that one because, you know, people would call us that. Neglect of duty or malfeasance in office. Are those legal terms?
Those are legal terms. And if you were to choose to use one of those as the basis for the removal of somebody from office, you would probably need to articulate what amounted to the incompetence.
So most likely people just stop coming. That's the most likely. So that doesn't fit under incapacity, incompetence, neglect. I guess it's neglect of duty.
You could argue that it's neglect of duty. And I can say that many boards and commissions have that. If you don't show up 3 times in a row or however many times in a row, then it's assumed that you're, it's not you, it's me kind of a situation.
So the assumption, right. So the assumption is really what we should be doing is if someone misses 3 months in a row, is someone should politely call them.
Correct.
And say, are you still interested?
Correct. And Councilmember Boki, you're hitting on kind of the core of what your committees and commissions are supposed to be doing. There should be a relationship between the city and that person. They should have a feel for what you're looking for from them. They should feel comfortable that they know how to deliver it, that they know who to ask if they have questions about what their role is. And that's really incumbent on us at City Hall and you as council. You set the general direction, we give them the assistance they need, but they bring the enthusiasm and the interest to be a part of that board. And if you have that kind of relationship, you don't typically end up with the 3 absences. You know that, oh, the person's moving from Lakewood or they've taken another job or something like that. And you know that before the meetings are missed, and it can be kind of an agreed departure sort of a thing.
Yeah, some people, their job hours change or something, and it just becomes nearly impossible for them to make. I mean, I know we try to have the meetings at times that they can make it, but it's sometimes very difficult if their job status changes or whatnot.
Correct.
Okay, so, and that's really what I'm saying is we now have this legal language that sounds very ominous, neglect, malfeasance. Those are really just, I'm looking at these as worst case scenarios.
Correct. That's what it would be. And it gives some gravitas to people when you're offering them the
So
position.
malfeasance. Person not within their duties as being on that board gets charged with a felony of some sort. Does that charged? Is that malfeasance?
Well, to respond with another legal term, it depends. I think where you could run into some type of malfeasance is where you have a committee or commission member that by virtue of their volunteer nature has access to areas of City Hall where they then start using the copier, not just for 1 or 2 copies, but for some of their other volunteer work, things like that. It's, we could go on with all sorts of different little examples, some smaller, some larger, but it is conceivable that someone could commit some version of malfeasance.
And so a couple other points, and so I'm done asking questions. And so this is just for the body. I think these could be handled on consent agenda. We typically handle a lot of things on consent agenda. And since the Mayor Whalen is mayor, of course, I would pull it off the consent agenda and grill him as to his reasoning behind it and his lack of judgment. But the other thing with the youth council, I appreciate Councilmember Ransitter's remarks. I would note that they are 1-year terms, and so they can ride these things out. So, yeah, so thank you.
So, Mr. Branstetter.
Yeah, I apologize, Mr. Mayor. A couple more things just occurred to me in terms of wordsmithing the document. We have, sometimes we're using residents, sometimes we're using citizens, sometimes we're using individuals. And given that nearly all of our committees don't mandate that every single member be a resident, to do that if we can just look at wordsmithing through that of where residents, citizens, and individuals is used to see if we're at least being consistent, to include being consistent with the idea that most of the committees say it's allowable to appoint a non-resident if that would be beneficial to the work of the committee. And I guess that I would just point out to the mayor that good cause is a legal term that you will get to define again and again and again.
And we do. Which brings up my question is, so where is boorish behavior in the list? Because it's not incapacity, incompetence necessarily, neglected duty necessarily, or malfeasance. One just doesn't get along. They're manipulating, monopolizing, and abusive to staff.
Well, Mayor Whalen, I think that I would first look under the free speech elements of our Constitution, because I do think you hit a very narrow line. If they are thwarting the purpose of the committee,
Right.
that is one thing. If, on the other hand, it's simply a robust free-for-all trying to get to the answers that the council has asked them to find, as boorish as it may seem, if that person's been properly appointed, that may be their role in that group. The best we can probably do is to properly advise and instruct our committees and commissions when we appoint them, be thoughtful in the appointments. As unhappy as it sometimes seems, sometimes the point is to get the boorish viewpoint out in that audience rather than in a different audience, and maybe give them a chance to hear an opposing viewpoint. Not always comfortable. And I think our staff, our city hall folks need to be mindful if they feel like only one viewpoint's coming out when there should be multiple viewpoints. To the degree that city hall folks are being, and I'll use air quotes, abused, there are avenues they have for discussing that with either their supervisors or higher up than that. And generally what our take is that to a point, that is part of the business, if you will, and we typically don't take it personally. We take it as someone's passion for their topic. If it did get to the point of being what we consider to be out of control, we would figure out how to deal with that. You may be aware that years ago, we had a requester who's since passed away, a public disclosure requester, who fits the definition of boorish. And we did have some complaints from folks who had to deal with him, and we worked through it. You know, you just work through it. Everybody's got their own way of expressing themselves. So as long as it's not thwarting the process or quieting voices that should be heard, we'll try to roll through it.
Very good. Mr. Anderson.
On that point, I slightly disagree with. Is a case involving the former assessor. And I try to forget his name, but Dale Washington.
Oh, yeah. Okay.
It indicates that the conduct of an elected official can indeed create a hostile work environment, and that conduct can be the basis for recall.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And so if it applies to an elected official, it could apply to an appointed committee member.
Absolutely.
But so when I say I slightly disagree with you, I disagree that behavior by the council, a committee member that becomes abusive can be cause for removal. But I would also submit that it falls within good cause based on the case law. So I don't think we need to change it, but I think we need to be aware that that conduct, our intent in going forward, that conduct can, in fact, be the basis for removal.
Maybe it could be in the language here, for cause, comma, including incapacity, incompetence, neglected duty, or malfeasance. So that we have cause as we may wish to define it a little bit more broadly with regard to truly harassment, inappropriate harassment or harassing behavior. That makes sense? For cause, comma, including.
It does.
But not limited to blah, 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 blah.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. And I think we get over the "it depends" rule.
We'll bring this back next week.
Yeah. Very good. Well, thank you. Mr. Caulfield, anything else on your agenda there?
Mayor, Deputy Mayor, and Council, just given the time, just a friendly reminder that this Saturday is Parks Appreciation Day, and Ms. Dodsworth has identified a number of parks to go to. They are Fort Steilacoom Park, American Lake Park, Wards Lake Park, Springbrook Park, and Kiwanis Park. So if you're looking for something to do on Saturday, any one of those 5 facilities, and they'll put you to work, 9 a.m. and then 9 a.m. That's correct. So with that, Mayor.
Well, thank you. Lakewood Rotary is going to be showing up at Fort Silicon Park for Parks Appreciation events. If you'd like to join us in that endeavor, let me know. I'll add you to the list. Mr. Brandstetter, council comments.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I guess the first thing that I note is that I've noticed that after a long absence, that we now have art in the city hall, in the hallway, where there have been just wires hanging to do that. So the new items are colorful. They're somewhat geometric, so they're both acute and obtuse, but they are bright and colorful, and they add something to the city hall. And the Arts Commission that has the process of selecting those for this quarter, I would commend them for being able to go and do that. I'd also say that the last time we met and you asked me to address to the Public Safety Advisory Committee, taking on getting a survey of public safety needs and climate in the community amongst the business community. That they discussed that at their meeting, and they appointed a committee to look at how feasible it is to do that against both your request and Deputy Chief Unford, who was there, of saying that a survey that only produced generalities was not be actionable, so that the survey was constructed, it would be something that would actually be useful information for the department to then take actions on. So they're going to move forward with that, but they don't have a timeline about when they will look at having a survey prepared and done the coordination with the Chamber of Commerce and others to administer it. But that is moving forward.
If I could interject, there may be something helpful with Ms. Newton in that regard, because she does do the business retention visits or calls annually. So perhaps that could be part of that conversation, or some language that could be utilized there.
Yeah, I did pass her as a resource on to Mr. Hart, who's the chair, to do that, and so they'll be looking to do that. However, recognize that is a group that only meets every 2 months, and so it'll be some time before I have some feedback for you about how and on what timeline they're going to proceed. And then I would just say that I was glad to see the abatement program for Carwan Village approved by us this evening, and particularly that the sewer work is actually going to be to decommission septic systems and in a public health way, move to actually getting them hooked up to the sanitary sewer system to be able to go and do that. And this will be the first city-funded project to do that, although it's going to identify a significant number of dwelling units outside of Tillicum, which is, something that we do need to address is that the pockets of septic systems that exist throughout the city. And that's all I have.
Great. Thank you, Mr. Boki. Great. Ms. Farmer.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. To the point about the geographic equity for state hospital discharges and us not being successful this go around, I would like to, I'm not entirely sure what our effort looks like, but I'd love to consider a council subcommittee working with our lobbying group and staff on that. I'd like to volunteer for any such endeavor, and I'm happy to have further conversation. Also, I'm curious about we had several public comment tours on a warehouse project in Tacoma. And I'm curious if staff have identified any Lakewood impacts, and I would love to hear more about any identified Lakewood impacts. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Bell.
I don't know what's happening. Okay. So just to play off of Councilmember Farmer's last comment about wanting to know a little bit more about the impacts of the Tacoma warehouses in Lakewood, I think that's a great comment, would like to know that. And then I am disappointed I will not be at Parks Appreciation Day this weekend, but I would love to dance competitions, so not me. But I'm excited to see everything on social media and to see how the day went, and just a great thing that we can do for our parks. Thank you.
Mr. Anderson.
Well, first, I'd like to commend Mr. Caulfield and staff and the foresight to conduct a study of the utilization of this building. And I think it's particularly appropriate that we can use ARPA funds for that, because COVID has kind of changed the dynamic of office utilization. One of the more extreme examples of that is the city of San Francisco, which currently has a 20% vacancy rate of commercial office space in downtown San Francisco. But that is not what's really going on. That just means that 20% is not leased to anybody. Its occupancy rate is actually at 30%, which means that 70% of the office space is not being used. Its sublease availability is 30%. That means that of the people who have leased space, 30% of the space is up for sublease. And the commute to downtown on their commuter, they have all this trains of double buses that come into the financial district and Union Square area. That's running at 28% of its capacity prior to COVID. So the change can be fast and dramatic, and they're not, different places are recovering at different rates, but that's never going to recover if people aren't coming back. So the fact that we may be able to better utilize the space, which probably was overbuilt in the first place, is a wonderful opportunity. To Mr. Whalen's question earlier about the funny zigs and zags in the 28th district around Meadow Park, that's actually because nobody lives there. And it was outside the city of Tacoma, and they incorporated it so they could get the tax revenue because it's owned by Metro Parks. They've since are filling in the holes around there through other annexations. And I'm interested in the information regarding the controversial warehouse project in what used to be an airport one time, which has a lot of hardscape. But it's my understanding as a non-SEPA, non-planner type person that modern standards have so far departed from the surface water as the common enemy rule, which was still somewhat prevalent when I went to law school, to a standard in the Puget Sound area where you have to have on-site infiltration, which by definition recharges the groundwater. So that's all. Great.
Deputy Mayor Moss.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Briefly, Thursday, I attended the Emergency Food Bank Network, and I took the tour. That was very exciting, very nice. They were very appreciative of the work, of the support we get from the city. It was the first day of opening, and each attendee received a small starter plant of a vegetable. Yeah, and so, and from that on, it's every day that the people came in, they would have a starter plant for them with some type of a vegetable for them to grow. So that was good. We had a great turnout. I was really impressed with way it was laid out and the presentation that was presented. They're looking forward to the new warehouse, which is going to be built down past the new parking lot. So good event. I enjoyed it. Thank you very much.
Well, just briefly here, a lot of stuff going on some of the comments tonight on the library, library board city work collaboratively on the Burke contract. It looks like the meeting scheduled with the committee will be done in October. It would be good for us to perhaps see if we can set up a study session or joint meeting with the library board and the city council thereafter to review the results of that and to kind of get a sense of common direction. So if we can look at that mid to late October, I suppose, when it makes sense, that would be great. Coffee with the mayor. The next one is going to likely discuss the issue of homelessness. It'll be timely because we will have a council retreat, I believe, on that issue as a follow-up to our retreat this last time in May, right, Mr. Manager, on the 4th-ish of May sometime. So that will be timely for that, in addition to the monies we're investing with Cdbg and home funds, as we heard tonight. The public comment on crime. It's challenging to hear that, and it was good to get him connected, the family connected with Chief Zarro. I think he's going to do a great job chatting with them about what they can do to perhaps strengthen their own property security in their area. But it does raise the issue. We hear all the time, all these issues, not just in Lakewood, but in surrounding communities on the increase in property crimes. And I see on Facebook and then Lakewood next door neighbor, constant comments about either people ripping stuff off front porches or cars in the driveways being broken into. So it's a matter of just, obviously we have to be vigilant, but I look forward to getting our newly commissioned and academy graduated folks out on the street when we can, as soon as we can on that. That too, to be able to pursue. Yeah, and the more people can kind of come out and talk to him, even Malcolm Russell, you guys know, he had somebody try to rip off his vehicle in his driveway, and he was chasing him down the street on Meadow Road, and he had cameras, you know, the Ring camera thing, and the guy's ugly mug trying to break into his truck. It's just crazy stuff. It's all too often. Yeah, it's everywhere. Parks Appreciation Day we talked about in terms of the Gary Oak. Are we moving that resolution forward for Mr. Brandstetter at some point? I don't know. I haven't seen it on the calendar per se. Got it. Okay, very good. PCRC is Thursday. I will be attending PCRC. We received some good updates on Lakewood's housing population and employment targets from Tiffany Spear. And so we will be well prepared to discuss those with a letter that was forwarded to PCRC for that meeting. And that is all I have, unless anyone else has anything for the good of the order. Seeing nothing, we're adjourned.